I've been reflecting on my childhood a lot lately and realizing just how much it's affected me as an adult. Growing up, it always felt like I was living in Jack's shadow. He's my older brother by 3 years, and for as long as I can remember, my parents treated him like he was perfect. Me? Not so much. It wasn't just little things either. This was the kind of favoritism that hits you right in the gut, even when you're too young to fully understand why it's happening. Jack could get away with just about anything. I remember one time he broke my mom's favorite vase while we were playing tag inside the house. I was the one who got scolded for running in the first place, even though he was the one who knocked it over. My mom just said, "Well, Jack didn't mean to," as if I somehow meant for it to happen by existing. Another time, he got caught sneaking out to hang with his friends after curfew. My dad just gave him a slap on the wrist and said, "Boys will be boys." Meanwhile, I once missed dinner because I stayed late at a friend's house without telling anyone, and they grounded me for a week. A whole week for being a kid and losing track of time. It wasn't just punishments either. They praised Jack for everything, even things that didn't make sense. He got a good job for mowing the lawn half-assed, but when I cleaned the entire kitchen, my mom inspected it like I was a contestant on some cleaning competition show. If she found one crumb, she'd say, "You're so careless, Sarah." Careless? I was 10 years old and scrubbing countertops because I wanted her to notice me. Jack never had to try as hard as I did. He was their golden boy. And when I'd get upset and ask why they were so much harder on me, they'd brush it off with, "You're just being dramatic," or "Stop trying to start fights." By the time I hit my teenage years, I'd learned to stay quiet about it. What was the point? Complaining never changed anything. It only made them accuse me of being jealous or too sensitive. But the favoritism didn't stop. It just became more subtle. For example, Jack got a car for his 16th birthday. It wasn't new or anything, but still it was a car. When I turned 16, I got a lecture about responsibility and why I needed to work and save up if I wanted a car. I ended up walking or taking the bus everywhere for years. They even helped Jack pay for his college tuition. But when I asked for a little support with my own, my dad said, "We've done enough for you." It wasn't just unfair, it was exhausting. I always felt like I had to work twice as hard just to get half the recognition, and even then it didn't matter. No matter what I did, Jack was the favorite. Looking back now, I wonder if my parents even realized how much it hurt. Maybe they thought they were being fair because Jack was the responsible one, or because he had more potential or some nonsense like that. But all it taught me was that love and approval were things I had to earn, and even then they weren't guaranteed. Even now, as an adult, I can feel the weight of it. I've been out of the house for years, but the memories stick. Jack and I are cordial, but we're not close. I don't think he ever really noticed how differently they treated us. Why would he? He was too busy being praised. My parents and I? Let's just say we're not exactly on great terms. I call them on holidays and birthdays because it feels like the polite thing to do, but the conversations are short, and I'm always the one who hangs up first. It's hard not to feel bitter, especially when I see how much of that dynamic shaped who I am. I've got this constant voice in my head telling me I'm not good enough, that I'll never measure up. It's made relationships tricky too. I'm always second-guessing whether I'm being too needy, or if someone's going to get tired of me and walk away. I'm working on it though. Therapy's been helpful for unpacking all of this. But man, it's a lot to untangle. Sometimes I wonder if I should confront my parents about it, but I'm not sure what good it would do. They've never been the type to admit they're wrong. Part of me just wants to let it go and move on, but another part feels like they owe me an explanation or at least an apology. Not that I expect to get one. It's a mess, and I'm still trying to figure out how to make peace with it. Growing up, Jack was always my parents' golden child. But by the time we hit our teenage years, he wasn't just their favorite. He'd turned manipulation into an art form. And I was his favorite target. Looking back, I can't believe how good he was at twisting situations to make me look bad. It's not like I was perfect, but the way he'd frame me for things went beyond the usual sibling squabbles. It was downright cruel. One of the worst times happened when I was 15. I'd been saving money from babysitting gigs for months, so I could buy myself something nice for my birthday. I'd stashed $100 in an envelope and hidden it in a book on my shelf, thinking it was safe. Then one day my mom came storming into my room, holding the money in her hand like it was evidence in a crime scene. She was furious. "Why did you take this?" she demanded, shaking the envelope at me. I had no idea what she was talking about. Before I could even respond, Jack walked in with his trademark innocent look and said, "I caught her going through Dad's wallet yesterday. I told her not to, but she didn't listen." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. "What? That's not true," I shouted. "That's my money. I've been saving it." But it didn't matter. My dad came in and backed Jack up without even asking for my side of the story. "We raised you better than this, Sarah," he said, shaking his head in disappointment. No amount of protesting could convince them otherwise. They grounded me for 2 weeks, took the money, and gave me another lecture about trust and honesty. Meanwhile, Jack stood there looking like a saint. That wasn't the only time something like this happened. Jack had a knack for getting me in trouble for things I didn't do. Once he borrowed Dad's old camera without asking and dropped it, breaking the lens. Instead of owning up to it, he told our parents he'd seen me messing around with it earlier. I hadn't even touched the thing, but guess who got yelled at? Me, of course. "You need to learn to be more careful," Dad said while Jack just sat there smirking. It got to the point where I felt like I couldn't trust anyone in my own family. My parents believed everything Jack said without question, and it didn't matter how much evidence I had to prove my innocence. If Jack said I did something, that was the end of it. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if maybe I had done something wrong and just didn't remember it. It was like gaslighting, but from my own brother, and with my parents backing him up every step of the way. The worst part was how good Jack was at playing the victim when he needed to. If I ever tried to call him out on his lies, he'd act hurt and say something like, "Why are you always so mean to me, Sarah? I'm just trying to help." And my parents would immediately jump to his defense. "Stop being so harsh on your brother," Mom would say. "He's just trying to look out for you." It was maddening. I started keeping to myself more and more, just to avoid giving Jack any ammunition to use against me. I stayed in my room whenever I could, avoided family dinners, and stopped sharing anything personal. Felt safer that way. But even then, Jack would find ways to drag me into his messes. Sometimes he'd break things or make a mess and then call my parents in to see, claiming I'd done it. Other times he'd accidentally leave one of my notebooks out where they could find it, knowing they'd read it and get upset about something I wrote. I spent so many nights crying myself to sleep, wondering why he hated me so much. What had I ever done to deserve this? And why couldn't my parents see what was really going on? It wasn't just favoritism at that point, it was willful blindness. They didn't want to believe that their perfect son could be capable of lying or manipulating them. So they turned a blind eye to all the evidence. By the time I was 17, I was counting down the days until I could leave for college and get out of that house for good. I didn't know how I was going to make it happen, but I knew I couldn't stay. I needed to get away from Jack and from my parents, who seemed to think he could walk on water. I just wanted to be somewhere, anywhere, where I could finally breathe. I thought things would get better once I moved out. I told myself that once I wasn't under the same roof as Jack, I'd finally have a chance to live my life without him constantly sabotaging me. For a while it felt like I had escaped. I went to college, got a job, and started building something for myself. I stayed low contact with my parents because honestly they drained me emotionally. But Jack? He was like a shadow I couldn't shake. First it was little things. He'd casually drop comments during family phone calls about how I was too busy to visit or how I seemed distant. My parents would eat it up, making me feel like I was the bad guy for trying to set boundaries. I didn't think much of it, it was just Jack being Jack. But then it escalated in ways I never could have imagined. It started at a family gathering a few years after I moved out. I'd been invited to a barbecue at my aunt's house, and I decided to go. I was nervous because I hadn't seen most of my family in a while, but I figured it would be nice to catch up. When I got there though, I noticed something was off. People were distant, giving me polite but cold smiles, avoiding conversation. Even my aunt, who used to be warm and welcoming, seemed like she was walking on eggshells around me. Eventually, I overheard my cousin whispering to another relative, "Do you think she's going to blow up again? Jack said she's been unstable lately." My stomach dropped. What the hell were they talking about? I hadn't had any blow-ups or anything even close. But when I confronted my cousin, they just gave me a nervous laugh and changed the subject. Later that evening, I cornered Jack in the kitchen and asked him point-blank what he'd been saying about me. He put on his usual innocent act, tilting his head and feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" I haven't said anything. But the smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few months, the rumor spread like wildfire. Jack started telling anyone who would listen that I was losing it. According to him, I'd been having screaming fits and insulting people at family gatherings, accusing them of things that never happened. He painted me as this unhinged, angry person who couldn't be trusted. And the worst part? Everyone believed him. It didn't matter that I'd never done any of the things he claimed. My parents, my aunts and uncles, even my cousins, all of them started treating me like I was radioactive. They stopped inviting me to family events. Calls and texts from relatives became fewer and further between until they stopped altogether. One day, I tried to check in on a family group chat, only to find that I'd been removed. When I looked up some of my relatives on social media, I realized they blocked me there too. I tried reaching out to my parents to clear things up, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Jack told us everything, Sarah, my mom said in this tone that made it clear she thought I was beyond help. You need to take a hard look at yourself and get some help. We can't keep enabling this behavior. My dad chimed in with, we love you, but we can't have you disrupting the family like this. I was so shocked I couldn't even respond. It was surreal, like I'd been cast as the villain in a story I wasn't even part of. Jack's lies had become their reality, and there was nothing I could do to convince them otherwise. He'd poisoned the well so thoroughly that even my smallest actions were twisted into evidence against me. If I defended myself, I was overreacting. If I stayed quiet, it was proof that I was guilty. I started feeling paranoid, wondering what Jack would say about me next, and who else would believe him. It was exhausting, constantly being on edge and knowing that no matter what I did, I'd always be the bad guy in his narrative. Therapy helped a little. I started to recognize that Jack's manipulation wasn't my fault, and that I couldn't control other people's beliefs. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. I'd spent so much of my life trying to earn my family's love and approval, only to have it ripped away by the same person who'd been undermining me since we were kids. Felt like there was no winning. Part of me wanted to fight back, to call Jack out in front of everyone and expose him for the liar he was. But another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. My family had already chosen their sides and I wasn't on theirs. Now, I only talk to a handful of people from my family, those who haven't completely shut me out. But even with them, it's awkward and strained, like they don't quite believe me but don't want to say it out loud. I'm trying to move on and focus on the people in my life who actually care about me. But the scars from Jack's lies run deep. Some days I wonder if he even realizes the damage he's done. Other days I think he knows exactly what he's done, and that he enjoys it. After years of dealing with Jack's lies and manipulation, I finally hit a breaking point. I realized that if I didn't start protecting myself, he'd keep spinning his web of lies, and I'd have no way to fight back. The worst part wasn't even the lies themselves, it was the way people just blindly believed him no matter how absurd the story. I felt helpless, like I was being drowned in a narrative I couldn't control. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Jack wanted to play dirty, I'd come prepared with the truth. I started documenting everything. Every text, every phone call, every casual conversation, I kept it all. If Jack messaged me, I'd screenshot it and save it in a folder labeled evidence. If he called, I'd record the conversation. It wasn't illegal where I lived to record calls as long as one party consents, and I sure as hell consented. I even started journaling after every family interaction, writing down exactly what happened and how people acted. It felt paranoid at first, but it also gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. One of the first pieces of damning evidence I collected came from an old voicemail Jack left me. He had called to apologize for something trivial, but his tone was smug, like he was enjoying himself. At the end of the message, he said something that made my blood boil. You know, you should really learn to relax, Sarah. Nobody believes you anyway. I saved that voicemail in 3 different places just in case I ever needed it. The real breakthrough came from my cousin Tom. He's a bit of a black sheep in the family. Doesn't care much for drama and mostly stays out of it. But one day I decided to reach out to him, hoping he might have some insight into what was going on behind the scenes. To my surprise, he was more than willing to talk. You know, Jack loves to brag about how easy it is to get people to believe him, Tom said during one of our conversations. He's been doing it since we were kids. He once told me it's like a game for him. He gets a kick out of seeing how far he can push people. Hearing that made my stomach churn. On one hand, it was validating to know I wasn't crazy, Jack really was doing this on purpose. But on the other hand, it was horrifying to think that someone could take pleasure in ruining another person's life like that. Tom even mentioned that Jack had openly laughed about how predictable our parents were. He knows exactly what to say to get them on his side, Tom said. It's like he's playing them like puppets. I asked Tom if he'd be willing to back me up if I ever confronted Jack or our family, and he hesitated. Look, I believe you, he said. But you know how they are. They won't listen to me. They never do. I couldn't blame him for being cautious. He'd seen firsthand how our family operates. Still, knowing he believed me was a small comfort. I also started digging through old letters, emails, and even social media posts. I found so many little clues that painted a picture of Jack's manipulation. For example, there was a Facebook post from years ago where he joked about how good he was at talking his way out of anything. At the time, people had laughed it off, but now it felt like a confession. The more I collected, the more confident I felt. For the first time in years, I had something solid to hold on to, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't the problem. But it was also a lot to carry. I'd spent so long feeling like the victim that stepping into a position of power felt strange. I kept asking myself, what's the endgame here? What am I supposed to do with all of this? Part of me wanted to confront Jack directly, to shove the evidence in his face and demand an explanation. But another part of me knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. Jack would just twist it around like he always did. He'd find a way to make me look bad, and I'd end up right back where I started. Instead, I decided to bide my time and keep collecting. I didn't know when or how I'd use the evidence, but I wanted to be ready. If Jack ever tried to spread another lie about me, I'd have the receipts to prove him wrong. And maybe, just maybe, I could start rebuilding some of the relationships he'd destroyed. In the meantime, I started setting boundaries with my family. I didn't cut them off completely, but I stopped engaging in situations where I knew Jack would have the upper hand. If my parents called, I kept the conversation short and avoided anything personal. If there was a family gathering, I'd make an excuse not to go. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only way I could protect my peace. Collecting evidence felt like the first real step toward reclaiming my life. For so long, I'd been stuck in this cycle of reacting to Jack's lies and trying to defend myself, but now I was playing offense. It wasn't just about proving him wrong, it was about proving to myself that I deserved better. That I wasn't crazy or overly sensitive or all the other things he'd made me feel over the years. I don't know what the future holds, or if I'll ever get my family to see the truth. But for now, I'm holding on to the one thing Jack can't take from me. The truth. And if he ever tries to cross me again, I'll be ready. I never thought I'd have the guts to do it. But the day finally came when I exposed Jack for the liar and manipulator he was. After years of dealing with his crap, being blamed for things I didn't do, having my family turned against me, and living under the weight of his lies, I was done. I'd spent months quietly collecting evidence, and when I discovered the final piece of the puzzle, I knew it was time to act. It started when I was going through some old financial records my mom had asked me to help organize. I wasn't planning to dig up dirt on Jack. It just kind of fell into my lap. While sorting through receipts and bank statements, I found several large withdrawals that didn't make sense. When I asked my mom about them, she said, "Oh, those were for Jack's medical expenses a few years ago. He didn't want to worry us, but he had some serious health issues." Health issues? That was news to me. I didn't remember Jack being sick, let alone needing thousands of dollars in medical care. Something didn't add up. So I asked a few more questions, and the details Mom gave me didn't make sense. She mentioned specific procedures that didn't match the supposed dates, and when I casually brought it up to Jack later, his reaction was weird. He got defensive immediately, snapping, "Why do you even care? It's none of your business." That was the final straw. I went into full investigation mode, combing through everything I had on Jack. I cross-referenced the dates of the withdrawals with his supposed medical issues and found nothing. No hospital visits, no doctor's appointments, nothing. Then I stumbled across something even more damning. Forged medical documents. They were amateurishly done, with typos and inconsistent details, but they'd been enough to fool my parents. Jack had created fake invoices and statements to justify the money he'd taken. In total, it was over $10,000. At that point, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. My parents had been blindly supporting Jack for years, and he was bleeding them dry while smearing my name in the process. I decided to confront him at the next family dinner, where everyone would be present. If I was going to expose him, I wanted witnesses. The night of the dinner, I was nervous but determined. I showed up early, armed with my folder of evidence, screenshots, voicemails, forged documents, everything. As soon as everyone had finished eating and the conversation lulled, I took a deep breath and said, "There's something I need to talk to you all about. It's important." Jack immediately stiffened like he could sense what was coming. "Can this wait? We're having a nice evening," he said, trying to shut me down. But I wasn't backing down. "No, it can't wait," I said firmly. "This is about you, Jack, and what you've been doing to this family." Everyone looked confused, and my mom started to say something, but I cut her off. "I've spent years being blamed for things I didn't do, while Jack has been lying to all of you. And I have the proof." I pulled out my folder and started laying everything on the table. Literally. I showed them screenshots of Jack's messages bragging about manipulating people, the forged medical documents, and bank records showing the withdrawals he'd taken from my parents. My parents' faces went pale as they looked through the evidence. "Jack, what is this?" my dad asked, his voice shaking. Jack tried to laugh it off. "This is ridiculous. She's clearly making this up to get back at me." But I was ready for that. "Really, Jack? Did I also make up this voicemail where you said, 'Nobody believes you anyway'? Or how about these fake invoices with typos and dates that don't match? You've been lying to everyone, and it stops now." For once, Jack didn't have a comeback. He stammered something about how he needed the money, and didn't mean to hurt anyone, but it was too late. The damage was done. My parents were furious, and the rest of the family was dead silent, staring at Jack like they were seeing him for the first time. "What the hell, Jack?" my dad finally said. "We trusted you. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." My mom started crying, saying she couldn't believe she'd been so blind. Jack tried to play the victim, saying he'd only done it because he didn't have a choice, but nobody was buying it anymore. That night, my parents apologized to me for the first time in my life. They admitted they'd been wrong to believe Jack over me all those years and said they were ashamed of how they treated me. It was bittersweet. I appreciated the apology, but it didn't erase the years of hurt. Still, it felt good to finally have the truth out in the open. As for Jack, he stormed out of the house before the night was over, muttering something about how we'd turned against him. I haven't heard from him since, and honestly, I don't care if I ever do. My parents have been trying to rebuild their relationship with me, and while it's a slow process, it's a step in the right direction. Exposing Jack was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most liberating. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe again. The truth is out, and Jack's hold over my life is finally broken. After the bombshell I dropped at the family dinner, the fallout was immediate. For years, Jack had built his entire persona on being the golden child, the perfect son, the trustworthy sibling. But now all of that was crumbling around him. For the first time in my life, I saw my family start to question him, and it was equal parts satisfying and heartbreaking. My dad was the first to fully believe me. As he looked over the evidence, I could see the realization sinking in: the forged documents, the screenshots, the pattern of manipulation. He wasn't just angry. He looked devastated. "How could you do this, Jack?" he asked, his voice filled with disappointment. "We trusted you. We believed you, and this is how you repay us." Jack, of course, tried to fight back. "You're really going to believe her over me? She's been out to get me for years. Don't you see what she's doing?" He looked desperate, but it was clear his usual charm wasn't working anymore. My mom, on the other hand, was harder to convince. She kept flipping through the papers I'd laid out, her hands trembling. "Are you sure these aren't, I don't know, fake?" she asked. "I just can't believe Jack would do something like this." Her words stung, but I'd expected it. She'd spent years defending Jack, and I knew it wasn't going to change overnight. But my dad didn't hesitate. "This is real, Karen. Look at the dates. Look at the evidence. It's all here. We've been blind to this for too long." I stayed quiet, letting the evidence speak for itself. Jack's reaction only made him look guiltier. Instead of addressing the evidence, he doubled down on attacking me. "She probably made all this up. She's always been jealous of me. Don't you see what's happening? She's manipulating you now. It was almost laughable, the irony of him accusing me of manipulation after everything he'd done. But his words didn't land the way they used to. My dad shook his head. Enough, Jack. We've seen enough. My mom was still hesitant, clinging to the image she'd had of Jack for so long. But why would he do this? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would he lie to us like this? Jack tried to answer, stumbling over his words. I had no choice. I needed the money and you wouldn't understand. You always pressure me to be perfect. Don't you dare turn this around on us, my dad snapped, cutting him off. We gave you everything you ever needed and you lied to us. You lied to all of us. The rest of the family was watching the scene unfold, their expressions a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. Some of them had been staunch supporters of Jack, always quick to side with him and dismiss my concerns. But now, even they were quiet, their faith in him clearly shaken. It wasn't until my mom reread the forged documents for the third time that she finally seemed to accept the truth. She put the papers down and looked at me, her eyes full of tears. Sarah, she said softly, I'm so sorry. I don't know how we didn't see this sooner. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug her and accept her apology, but another part of me was still raw from years of being dismissed and ignored. It's not just about seeing it sooner, I said. It's about believing me when I tell you something's wrong. You've spent years siding with Jack no matter what he did. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? She nodded, her tears spilling over. I do now. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I don't know how we can make it up to you, but I want to try. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. As for Jack, his support among the family completely collapsed that night. Some relatives tried to stay neutral, saying things like, we don't want to take sides. But the damage was done. Jack had spent so long building himself up as the perfect son and sibling, but now everyone saw him for what he really was. He didn't go quietly, though. In the days after the dinner, he sent out frantic messages to the family group chat, accusing me of everything from forgery to sabotaging his life. He even tried to get sympathy by claiming I'd ruined his reputation and turned everyone against him. But nobody was buying it anymore. My parents stopped responding to his messages, and several relatives blocked him outright. Even the ones who used to believe him were now keeping their distance. The lies he'd used to manipulate everyone had finally caught up with him, and he had no one left to back him up. For me, the aftermath was a mix of relief and exhaustion. I'd spent so long trying to prove the truth that I hadn't fully processed what it would feel like to finally be believed. It was freeing, but it also brought up a lot of old wounds. My parents were trying to rebuild our relationship, and while I appreciated their efforts, it was going to take time. One thing I did learn from all of this is that I don't need my family's validation to feel whole. For years, I'd let Jack's lies and their favoritism define me, but now I'm finally starting to let that go. I've built a life for myself outside of their influence, and that's what matters most. As for Jack, I have no idea what he's doing now, and honestly, I don't care. For the first time in my life, I'm free from his shadow. And that's all I ever wanted. After everything came out, my life changed in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Exposing Jack felt like breaking free from a cage I'd been trapped in my entire life. But freedom didn't mean everything suddenly became easy. The fallout was messy, and while I finally had the truth on my side, it also meant confronting the reality of what years of manipulation had done to my relationships, and to me. The first thing I did was set clear boundaries with my family. My parents wanted to talk more after the dinner, trying to repair the damage their years of favoritism and enabling Jack had caused. I appreciated their efforts, but I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. For now, I told them that I needed space, and that any communication had to be on my terms. They didn't like it, but they respected it. As for Jack, I made it clear to everyone that I would not be contacting him or accepting any attempts he made to reach out to me. I'm done, I told my parents when they cautiously suggested that maybe one day we could mend things. Jack has spent my entire life trying to destroy me, and I'm not giving him another chance to do it. My dad nodded solemnly, clearly still grappling with the betrayal, while my mom looked pained but didn't argue. Surprisingly, Jack didn't try to contact me directly. After the dinner, he went into full damage control mode. But his usual tactics didn't work anymore. The family saw through him, and the support he used to take for granted had completely evaporated. It was almost surreal to watch him go from being the center of attention to someone nobody wanted to associate with. From what I've heard through the grapevine, Jack has been keeping a low profile ever since. His reputation was ruined after the exposure, and he couldn't spin the story in his favor, no matter how hard he tried. Relatives who once defended him have stopped replying to his messages, and even his friends seem to be keeping their distance. It's like he finally realized that his lies and manipulation only worked as long as people trusted him. And now, that trust is gone. I don't feel sorry for him. For years, he thrived on making me the scapegoat, using me as a stepping stone to elevate himself. He didn't just lie to my family. He tore relationships apart for his own gain. Whatever consequences he's facing now, he brought on himself. For me, the hardest part has been learning how to live outside of Jack's shadow. For so long, my identity was tied to being the problem in the family, the one who was always blamed, always doubted. Even after the truth came out, I found myself questioning whether I really deserved to move on. Years of gaslighting had left their mark, and it's been a process to unlearn all the self-doubt and guilt Jack instilled in me. Therapy has helped a lot. My therapist has been a lifeline, helping me work through the trauma and build confidence in myself. I've also been focusing on strengthening relationships with people who actually care about me. My parents are trying, and while I'm not ready to fully trust them yet, I can see they're genuinely remorseful. My dad, especially, has been making an effort to show me he values me in ways he never did before. One of the biggest steps I've taken is redefining my own sense of worth. For years, I sought validation from my family, hoping they'd finally see me for who I was instead of who Jack made me out to be. Now I'm learning to find that validation within myself. I'm proud of what I've accomplished and the life I've built, and I don't need their approval to feel good about it. There are still moments when the past creeps in. When I hear a story about sibling rivalry, or see a family acting close, and it brings up memories of everything I missed out on. But I remind myself that I've come so far from where I used to be. I'm not the scared, silenced kid Jack painted me as. I'm strong, and I'm finally in control of my own story. As for Jack, I don't think about him much anymore. He's no longer a part of my life, and I'm okay with that. Whatever he's doing, wherever he is, it doesn't matter to me. My energy is better spent on the people and things that bring me joy, not on someone who spent years tearing me down. Releasing Jack's shadow hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. For the first time, I feel free to be myself without constantly looking over my shoulder. And that freedom? It's something Jack can never take away from me again. Looking back on everything, I can honestly say I found a peace I never thought was possible. For so long, my life felt like a constant battle, fighting to prove my worth, to be heard, to be believed. Jack's manipulation made me question everything about myself, and my parents' blind faith in him made it worse. But now, after everything that's happened, I finally feel like I've stepped out of that dark chapter and into the light. The biggest change has been within me. For years, I struggled with self-doubt, feeling like I wasn't good enough, or that everything was somehow my fault. That's the poison of manipulation. It makes you internalize the lies until they feel like the truth. But through therapy, reflection, and sheer determination, I've started to undo that damage. I've regained my self-confidence, and I no longer allow myself to be manipulated or walked over by anyone, family or otherwise. Setting boundaries has been a game changer. I used to think that family ties meant I had to put up with anything, no matter how much it hurt me. But now I know that's not true. Boundaries are healthy, and they're necessary. I've drawn a clear line with my family, and while it hasn't always been easy, it's been the best thing I could have done for myself. My parents are working to rebuild our relationship, but they know now that my trust has to be earned, and that it's not a guarantee. As for Jack, he's out of my life for good. I don't check up on him, I don't ask about him, and I don't care what he's doing. He thrived on controlling the narrative and keeping me under his thumb, but I've taken that power back. He can't hurt me anymore because I refuse to give him any space in my mind or my life. Letting go of that anger and resentment has been liberating. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it means I'm no longer carrying the weight of his actions. One of the biggest lessons I've learned through all of this is that the fight for the truth is never easy, but it's always worth it. Standing up for yourself, especially against someone who's spent years undermining you, can feel impossible. It's scary, and it's exhausting, and sometimes it feels like you're completely alone. But the truth has a way of shining through, even in the darkest moments. If there's one thing I want others to take from my story, it's this: don't be afraid to defend yourself. Don't let fear or doubt stop you from standing up for what's right. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it can feel like the world is against you. But your voice matters and your truth matters. You don't have to accept being treated unfairly, even by the people who are supposed to love you. I've also learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about moving forward in spite of it. My experiences with Jack and my family will always be a part of my story, but they don't define me anymore. I've taken back control of my narrative, and I'm proud of the person I've become. I'm stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought I could be. These days, my life is quieter, but it's filled with things that make me happy. I've surrounded myself with people who respect me and bring out the best in me. I've poured my energy into things I'm passionate about, and I've learned to celebrate my own achievements, no matter how small. Most importantly, I've found a sense of peace that I didn't know was possible. The road to get here wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I fought for myself, and I won. And if you're in a similar situation, I want you to know that you can win too. The truth is powerful, and so are you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve to be heard. You do. Always.